Well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for inviting me today, and thank, of course, the organizers for putting this event together. I think it's very important that we have a public forum to discuss openly these kinds of issues. I would like to discuss the issue of domestic violence and economic empowerment of women within the specific context of North Kosovo. My organization, AKTIV, has been working in the field of domestic violence issues for the past 2 years now, mostly in cooperation with the Finnish embassy. The first year of our cooperation, we carried out very detailed research on domestic violence in North Kosovo. It was one of the first projects that had been carried out in that part of Kosovo ever, if I'm not mistaken. What we found was that 50% of women were either witnesses or victims of domestic violence, and 34% of women were direct victims of domestic violence, physical, emotional, sexual, or material. That having been said, we have anecdotal evidence that would suggest that the number is actually higher than 34%. But 34% is the percent of women that directly acknowledge that the violence is present in their family. Something else, another goal that we had in conducting that research was to identify services vacuum in terms of what local public institutions were providing for victims. Unfortunately, we found that 96% of all respondents claimed that public institutions were not doing enough to assist victims of domestic violence, especially in the area of economic empowerment. Of course, domestic violence does not have a social class, just like it doesn't have ethnicity, nationality, or color. That having been said, what we do find is that violence is more prevalent, at least in North Kosovo, in rural areas, where the, let's say, patriarchal model of family life tends to be much stronger. The economic component is important in terms of empowerment of victims because it, although, as I said before, domestic violence is not relegated to one social class or another, it does impact poor women more because they feel themselves more dependent on their abuser. This is why we feel that it is very important to write economic empowerment programs into any future project dealing with domestic violence that will be implemented in North Kosovo. Not only will empower victims to separate themselves permanently from their former abusers, but it will also have a deeply positive psychological impact. Now, as I mentioned before, there is a services gap. One of the main services gap that we identified, which was perhaps obvious and we didn't need to do research for, was the lack of a safe house in North Kosovo. There are, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, around 9 safe houses, shelters for victims of domestic violence around South Kosovo, and we would like to replicate those projects and implement something very similar in the north. Now, it is very important when dealing with questions of domestic violence to have a holistic approach. Because we're talking about combating deeply ingrained societal beliefs, deeply ingrained patriarchal structures which enable such high levels of domestic violence. But also, of course, we are talking about a lack of concrete material assistance that is currently available to victims. This is a problem that we see both with social services and in general. Of course, the lack of a safe house is the most glaring gap that exists, but I would also stress that the problem of domestic violence cannot be solved with a safe house alone. A safe house has to offer something to victims that is more than just shelter. It has to offer, of course, both psychological assistance, material assistance, as well as empowerment programs that will allow victims to emancipate themselves, so to speak. Of course, as has been mentioned before, the economic empowerment, not just of victims of domestic violence, but of women in general, is key to regional development. The fact that there is a high level of unemployment, particularly among women, is especially damaging to the overall economic situation. So something that we have set a goal of in our work with public institutions, work with local state institutions, is to ensure that programs of economic empowerment and vocational programs as well are key to any future approach. I can say with a certain amount of satisfaction that at least on a local municipal level in North Kosovo, and we have been working in all 4 municipalities of the north, it's North Mitrovica, Zečin, Zubin Potok, and Leposević, that domestic violence has become, the fight against domestic violence, has become somewhat of a political priority. But unfortunately, as of yet in the north, there's no program in place which specifically addresses the economic component, and this is of course a very serious deficit that we hope to address in the future. Thank you very much. I look forward to answering your questions.